Welcome to The Prize Inside. The Prize Inside. A chiropractor's journey in everyday holistic health and vitality. Here, your host, Dr. Jeromy Myers, delves into the remarkable journeys of everyday people who have embraced the path to health and healing. Through his practice, Dr. Jeromy encounters inspiring stories of profound transformation and the power of true healing within each of us. Stay tuned as we discuss various holistic topics and unlock the healing potential that lies within us all.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the 1% Tribe. Hopefully you guys are having a great night. Tonight will be a pretty fun one. We're doing one called Unlocking Your Hips, a holistic guide to hip pain and mobility. And we've done one a few, probably almost a year ago. I can't believe I'm kind of rehashing some of these with some new info. So I think that'll be the fun part, is like when we run into conditions such as this, that we can talk about that. So hopefully you guys had a good week. Enjoyed it. Yes, or the good weekend. We got to do a few car shows, which is kind of cool. Rachel opened the door. I think we're looking for a antique ride, which will be pretty cool. So if anybody's over there, I'd hate to undo anything in particular. So if you're on Rumble tonight and everything looks good, give me a thumbs up or something so I know, or just type in the chat. Otherwise, I'll just download this later. But let's start out with this. Remember, the newsletter and the transcripts, and now the live that goes into Substack is the Substack area. So if you ever want, basically the transcript, the newsletter from this podcast, let me know. It's tribe, TRIBE1 set.substack.com. If you put that in, you put your email in, you are automatically in. It's free, as I leave that up there for a little bit. And let's get started on unlocking your hips. Now, I know in podcast world, the weeks we use a lot of like YouTube videos or different exercises. I'll try to explain it as best I can so that my podcast audience getting something out of it. But if you're on my podcast audience and just go to Rumble or YouTube, you can watch the videos itself. But we'll do our best on that because I know I enjoy the tar out of podcasts. Just remember, it's fantastic. Though they can be so good. And so if you've never done the podcast world, I suggest you try it. It's like listening to talk radio all the time. That's what I love about it a lot. So anyway, let's talk about some hip stuff. All right, here we go. So unlock your hips, holistic hip pain and mobility. So we're going to talk about this because in the last few months, I've had some patients with some pretty good significant hip issues. They're improving, as I would think. Now, how it works in chiropractic, you're constantly learning, right? And so tonight is about some of the new things that are kind of coming out in physical therapy and a lot of those good things in the movement space. It's pretty interesting because I kind of innately started to understand this, like with sometimes no pain, no gain is like one of the worst things in some scenarios that we can go through. So a lot of times, and hips could be potentially one of those. Okay. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So what are we going to go over tonight? We're going to start from the beginning. We're going to kind of start like understanding how the hip arthritis comes to be and then the whys. So we'll kind of walk through that. I don't want to belabor too much of the point, understanding that my 1% tribe has gone through some mechanics, right? So there's several ways that hip arthritis could like manifest itself, right? Far from it is the one that a lot of people, in my opinion, if it far from it is the one that it's constantly blamed for, and that's genetics, because it doesn't make sense to me that you can have a genetically bad hip, that's just automatically bad from birth, right? What you can have though is you can have programs. Let's say when we go into those things called epigenetics, you have subconscious programs where as a adult, you learned how to walk by observing your family, right? The people that were closest to you, you observed how they walked, how they interacted with the earth. Okay. And with that created the subconscious ability to walk. We talk about that a lot, like where a lot of these subconscious things that people say are genetic are typically programs that are learned. So when you're born all the way up to about 6 years old, you can think of your brain and your subconscious as a tape recorder. Okay. So it's tape recording everything, the environment that it's within. This baby comes in, doesn't know anything but fluid, right? And now all of a sudden you put gravity on this little pudge coming out, and now it's got to figure out activity, movement, how to eat, do all these things. And what is it going to look to is the adult or the person that it's around a lot in the room. Okay. And so a lot of times you're going to see some of these things that we think are genetic when they're in fact, let's say, poor foot mechanics as you were, like watching mom walk or dad walk, those kind of things. So a lot of times it's going to be in hip world, it's mechanics of the human body. So this biomechanics and how you walk, biomechanics and how you stand, how you lift, all of those things, the biomechanics of the human frame and the nervous system and how it's functioning is really kind of the ultimate reason like a lot of this hip arthritis could occur. Okay. So that is a very big thing. Now, as we go, we're going to learn some different things that we can do to improve those, but understanding that it could be a foot, it could be a knee problem, it could be a spine problem, it could be a hip itself problem. What our problem is in society currently with the sick care model that we currently have is as soon as we have a problem with the hip, immediately the only thing we're looking at is in the hip. And more over the years that I've seen this, a lot of times what we're seeing is that there's so many like nervous system related stuff. So we are seeing massive, let's say, improvements in somebody's like hip in motion just by getting a chiropractic adjustment. Okay. So that one always kind of blew my mind, especially when you see some of the major arthritises that are out there. Okay. Now, on top of that, once you figured out that that's the mechanics that did that, how do we kind of restore and help the body get back to that place where that hip can work like it should? Right. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Okay. So let's talk about that. One of the other questions that is always there, why haven't we had less hip replacement over time? Why haven't we had people like, why haven't we figured out? So we figured out it's awesome that the hip replacement's really easy now. And that's cool. Like 20 years ago, it was like the worst thing on planet Earth. And people thought it'd be so easy. And then they go in there and like 6-7 months are like suffering. Right. But isn't it odd that we have like the same amount, if not more, hip replacements now than we did back in the day? And I'm just curious. I'm like, so obviously we've missed the mark somewhere, right? Because we're still having them. And so if we understood the solution, we wouldn't have these, have to put a giant metal pot, hip back into that location, correct? Yeah. So that is an interesting problem when we have an increased amount of hip replacements and knee replacements increasing over time, like as we go. So, and now the biggest thing tonight, what we're going to go over is what we can do physically, emotionally, and chemically, right? Thoughts, toxins, traumas that we can do to improve our outcomes for maybe we don't have to have one of those hip replacements. That'd be cool. But I digress. I'm not saying you are going to stop it necessarily, but I've seen it. It's pretty cool. Okay. All right, here we go. So, understanding hip conditions. We're going to go over this pretty quick and then we'll go into the cool exercises and stuff. So, from the innate intelligence framework, we want to talk about it. So, there's hip osteoarthritis, there's hip impingements. Okay. So, we'll talk about those. Piriformis and sciatica overlap, which is kind of your nervous system related stuff. Labral irritation, which we'll talk. I'm going to kind of explain them in a short frame because this is not about each one and like understanding each one because we could do that. But tonight's about kind of getting that hip motion in flow. So many times the hip is so often misunderstood because a person doesn't get the full workup. Is it the nervous system? Is it the gait? You must get a good look at the cause before we can change any of these things. So if you heard me, there's several that come up. Hip osteoarthritis is probably the number one. Hip impingement, I would say definitely number two, number three. I would say number one, probably overall is piriformis sciatica because the nervous system is involved early. And that's typically why people have hip mechanical issues. Labral irritation can happen, right? Labrum's like, if you think of, for my podcast or anybody, when you hear labral tear, it's kind of like think of when somebody tells you they got a meniscus tear in their knee. So it's that cartilage on the knee. So this is inside the hip itself. It's like the cartilage inside there gets torn. And then you have a bursitis. A bursitis is kind of this swollen hip. Something's happened, trauma, or we didn't walk correctly. We created chronic inflammation that causes the hip to be off too. Signs of declining mobility of the hip are stiffness after sitting, compensation in the low back and knees, reduced squat and gait quality should be early signs that we need to start doing some stuff. And that is one of the big things that we're going to talk about a little bit tonight is that the hip is really a kinetic inside. It's like deep into the kinetic chain. So a kinetic chain, think of the joints that have to get there from the ground. So so in the kinetic chain, before gravity gets to hit the hip, it has to go through the ankle, the knee, and then the hip. Hopefully that makes sense. So going from top down, it has to go through your head to your neck, to your upper back, to your low back, to your pelvis, to your hip. So you can see how deep inside the hip kinetic chain is that one of those two functions could be off and causing this hip thing to happen to you. The biggest thing is we just don't evaluate it. We just go start to try to fix a hip, but we never fix, how the person's walking. So it's this is a pretty good analogy of constantly changing the tire on an axle that's way whacked out of place. That the hip is major. It's a big one for that. Okay. So is it genetics? Is hip arthritis genetics, which we kind of went over, right? It could be genetics in a epigenetics sense where it is not necessarily genetic because they really haven't connected those two. But think of, you have to learn how to walk from someone. And if that someone had a hip replacement later about the same time you did, doesn't that make sense that potentially you're walking the same as your grandma and grandpa? Have you ever noticed that, you kind of walk the same way your parents do, right? So that's the interesting part. Just remember that as we go. Is it joint damage, and why is the joint damage occurring? Is it feet mechanics, spine mechanics, walking mechanics? How was your boots? Like let's say you were working and you had really crappy shoes. Are you sitting so much that it causes those kind of things? That's a very big concern of mine right now. I'm very nervous. I'm very concerned for our population in that sense. Seen a lot of, especially my ladies, that they have wonderful high-end sit-down jobs. Let's say very good at what they do, all those things. For whatever reason, I always think women, okay, so this is a theory I have. I could be wrong. So men will lose flexibility over time and not as much strength. So they kind of keep their strength. Women, it seems, lose strength, but not flexibility. So that's why I've always been a huge proponent of women doing weightlifting later in life, and then men doing yoga or like Tai Chi type versions of things. Both of them, no one does. Small percentage of people understand what I'm talking about there, but that is a big thing. And in my women, I'm seeing a lot of it with the sit down jobs that, you could sit for hours, right? Because of the job. And women are very skilled at those type, the constant, you're on the phone here's a computer, here's this thing to do, that thing to do. But over time, it starts to kind of mess with the muscles and it weakens the body in the lower level. It's concerning to me because I'm seeing a lot more sit down jobs, right? So we have like a ton of people that from COVID, they stayed at home. Maybe they never went back, right? And so then now we have all these, work from home type jobs, which sound great in theory. The problem is the work, the effort that your muscles have to do. Do you have to work as hard? And so it's a very concerning thing, just to kind of watch as we go. And the last thing is we always go over, is there a subconscious program as far as emotion goes, which we will go over at the end of tonight. Louise Hay, if you guys don't know, we go over that. Okay. So this is kind of the stuff that's interesting that I wanted to bring into tonight's talk before we start going into some cool videos on some new exercises out there. So here is what's new and trending in hip care and research. So there was updated clinical guidelines. This is key to listen to in this portion, okay? So the American Physical Therapy Association released the 2025 update to its osteoarthritis clinical practice guideline, the first major revision since 2017. It reinforces manual therapy, right? So you'd put chiropractic kind of in there, but they don't do that. They do other joint stuff. So you could add chiropractic to this list essentially, but it reinforces manual therapy, which is like chiropractic type stuff and a lot of physical therapy, different moves, joint mobilization, soft tissue work, long axis hip distraction as a first line evidence-backed intervention for mild to moderate hip osteoarthritis. Now here is where it gets crazy. This is what's so interesting. And this is it's part of what people have to understand when we're talking about the innate intelligence of the human body. This is typically dosed between 1 to 3 times a week for 6 to 12 weeks minimum. Now, what we're finding is to this day, people don't understand, and it's okay. I understand. We have lived in a world where everything is so easy, so quick, And so a lot of times, especially in these things like an osteoarthritis, a hip situation, we want it fixed yesterday. Well, some of the hips that I'm seeing, folks, you have this beautiful smooth hip on one side, and it looks like somebody took a baseball bat to the other hip. That is not going to be just a simple fix, right? It's not going to be something that over time, over a week, you're going to get back to where we need to be. Okay, it could take up to 12 weeks, right? 3 times a week with the focus on that. And that's just the physical therapy section. Okay. Tonight, I'm hoping to give you some good things to do. If I have hip arthritis, though, and I'm an innate intelligence focused person, wouldn't I be doing this every day? Isn't that what the 1% tribe is all about? So if you let's say you have had a hip issue in the past, this is where I'd be. This is where I'd be focused on. Okay. So just understanding that hip movements might take 6 to 12 weeks to get it done. That's a big statement, and an accepted statement, which is crazy by the sick care model. They usually are like, man, just get the hip replacement so we don't have to keep covering this long-term care stuff. It's just crazy that I can't believe, how dare us ask people to take care of their bodies every day. This is crazy. Now, insurance-wise, you can't expect them to do that. They would go out of business that way. But that's that. The big ta-da is three times a week for 6 to 12 weeks. It's not a quick fix, but it shows you even the science says it's going to take 6 to 12 weeks, even we don't want to admit it. That's what that is. Okay. So now there's this other thing. This is the other part of the research that I thought was interesting. There's a new hip capsule focus. Okay. So it's a notable shift in the mobility world away from just stretch the muscle, which is what you'll hear a lot. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is towards getting the hip capsule itself kind of moving better, right? So this is the deep connective tissue structure, not just the hip flexors and gluteus. Okay. This is called it comes out of this thing called the functional range conditioning and kin stretch methodologies that have trickled into mainstream fitness and content. So not only is this going to be, so think about your hip is covered in like the thickest kind of saran wrap possible. Okay. And so when things start going awry in there, this saran wrap is what's going to be the first initial thing that is kind of affected. Now, in years past, all we knew was to stretch certain muscles because the muscles are firing. And in my head, I've always learned from this guy named Dr. Mitch Malley. He might actually want to do that. I might grab him sometime. So Dr. Mitch Malley, we would say muscles are kind of, they're dumb. They just go where they're told to go. If the mechanics of your hip are off, then that means that there's more underlying mechanical issues that are causing those muscles to do what they're doing. Okay. And so typically in the sick care model, we constantly are working, stretching this muscle, stretching that muscle. What we want to do is get better motion into that joint some way, so how. Sometimes it's getting the chiropractic adjustment to your spine and nervous system. Sometimes it's getting your feet, knees, hips all evaluated and adjusted as well. But the one that you guys can do is what we're going to talk about soon, is it's understanding how to give that saran wrap and keep moving the joint regardless. Okay. So if that saran wrap gets all knotted up in there, what can we do? And what this is talking about is taking what that saran wrap or that capsule and kind of getting motion into that capsule, no matter what it takes, without worrying about stretching muscles or those kind of things. Okay. All right. So hopefully that made sense. Okay. So here's the two techniques that we're going to kind of go over tonight. One is called the hip cars. Okay. So this is controlled articular rotations. These are slow, controlled circles through the hips full range to map the main and maintain joint health. So what they're going to do is you're going to essentially, I do this in the office a lot. If people have been around, I'll have somebody lay on their back and just kind of move their hip back and forth and see where the end range of where they can go in that hip. Now, when you're a little kid, you can put that hip so visualize yourself laying on your back. Okay. And then you're going to bring your knee up, one knee. Let's say you're bringing your right knee up, leaving your left knee straight, and you're on your back. So now I'm going to take my hip over as far over your leg as you can and out like you're frog legging out the other way. And we're going to see how far that motion goes. In children, they'll go right to the ground on one side and go right to the other side, right? As we age, though, one of the things that we're noticing is that back and forth motion, and that's just in the capsule, okay? So you can feel how tight that capsule is. And this exercise that we're going to show right now is kind of one to help that out, okay? So let's get in there. Let's go to it. Okay, so we're going to go to this guy. This is called controlled articular. So looking it up in YouTube, look up CARs, hip CARs.
In this case, I'm going to be standing using a chair for balance. CARs for the hip. In this case, I'm going to be standing using a chair for balance. However, these can be done in many different positions. A couple things to keep in mind is we want our hips to stay forward and as little motion coming from the rest of the body as possible. Keeping your balance with the chair or the wall next to you, you're going to bring your knee up towards your chest as high as you can. From here, we're going to do what I call opening the door. So the leg is going to swing open. Now from here, we want the heel to turn up towards the ceiling as I come in.
Now, a lot of you are not going to be able to do this, but I want to show you what he's doing. He's just going to where he can. Let's say you couldn't bring our leg up as high as he is, but you see how you want to wing out like that. Okay, so this one's
internal hip rotation. Then I'm going to push backwards with my heel and close the door. And we'll simply reverse this motion with the heel leading into extension in the back. The leg rises as high as possible. The heel drops as the knee comes up, and we close the door. As you're moving through this, keep in mind a few things. Again, the hips facing forward at all times. And as you rotate in this position, we're going to try to avoid the hip hiking up. So we want as little motion as possible and nice and smooth in that joint.
You see how he's just moving the hip itself. Okay. So I thought that was a really, really good one. I got another one for the articular rotation. So these are very specific for getting that capsule to let go. Okay. So this is like things have happened.
To start a podcast with Riverside, all you need.
Blah, 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 blah. Sorry, guys. Okay.
Hey guys, this is Dr. Carl Baird at Evolve Performance Healthcare. Today we're covering an exercise called hip CARs. So CARs is just an acronym for controlled articular rotations. It's a great exercise to regain full range.
This one's going to be on the ground. So just remember that one as well.
Range of motion in the hip while at the same time improving motor control and stability in that hip joint as well. So to perform, what we're going to do, we're going to be on all fours with our hands right below our shoulders, our knees right below our hips. And then all we're going to do is we're going to lift one side and bring that hip into flexion. Once we're in flexion, slowly and in control, go into external rotation, bringing the hip out. And then we're going to extend back with a little bit of natural internal rotation of the hip. And then come back to the start and start again. Up and out. Straight back.
I kind of think of it as like if you're on your knees. So for my podcasters, if you're on your hands and knees and you were about to do kind of like a bicycle kick. So you'd like raise your knee up off of the mat. So let's say you're raising your right knee up off. So you're on all fours, right knee up, kind of flail it out like a frog leg, and then kind of kicking back with that foot like you're going to do a bike pedal. Okay. So hopefully that'll help with what we're talking about.
Into extension and back. So the one thing we want to do while we're doing this, and that I see a lot of people do, is we want to keep all that range of motion in the hip joint itself. Think it's a ball and socket joint, and we just want to keep it within that ball and socket. The one thing that people have a tendency to do when they're learning is especially when they come out, they're going to try to reach too high. And what happens is the whole body, you get a lot of rotation at the back. So be sure we're keeping all that range of motion at the hip joint itself, and that we're not, again, twisting that low back. So there you have it. Those are hip cars.
Okay. You can see how simple that is. I wanted to show that because a lot of times you're just moving that hip within that fossa there. Okay. So we're trying to get that. They call it a capsule, right? So we got a capsule over the top, and we're trying to open that capsule up. This one, as of this week, I have my own routine that I do every single morning. This one's going to add to my routine, especially the one on your feet where you're raising your knee up, kicking out like a chicken leg, and then going back as far as you can because you're moving that entire capsule around, which is fantastic. Okay. So that's what I wanted to show you there. Those are called, and I put into the description, I put the YouTube video that was just there for the seated down one. Right. And so these are shockingly really good. Shocking. Like it could change your trajectory. Honestly, like some people come in and their hips are just so bad. And these are like a game changer that I when I started working on people with these little tiny movements, I have got more out of it than what I used to do in making you do leg squats and do all these things. But the focus in on just that hip joint, getting better motion so that the rest of your body can get better motion, game changer. Okay. So now the next exercise tonight, they're called pails and rails. Okay. So these are called progressive or regressive angular isometric loading. Okay. So you don't have to know all of that. So these are called pails and rails. So these are two things you want to put into YouTube when you're looking for different exercises. Okay. There's not that many videos that'll have this stuff in there, but usually it's like a sweet physical therapist or something that is showing off these different movement patterns. Okay. So this is called progressive, regressive, angular, isometric loading. Loading joint at the end range to actually expand usable range just in passively stretching it. This is nice contrast point because it's the passive, which is above the cars, versus this one is a little more active. So this one, if you can kind of think of it, cars was kind of seeing where that range was and kind of staying within the range, right? Keeping that hip within the range. These are ones that kind of push that range just a little bit in there, okay? So it's going to take that hip and kind of go into that side that's really, really stiff, but we're going to go into it a little bit. 1%. So this is where 1%, this could be a really good one. So let me pull up the pails and rails. All right, let's start with this one.
Or progressive angular isometric loading, or regressive angular isometric loading. So a really complex name, but a pretty simple exercise to gain.
Yeah. So basically it is trying to get a little more movement out of that joint, that hip joint. Okay. In the capsule. We're not trying to stretch a bunch of muscles.
Gain some more range of motion, particularly into dorsiflexion. So what I like to do is I like showing it in a lunge position, but you can do really any position. Half kneeling is a good way to do it too. So from here, what I'm doing is I'm pushing my knee forward trying to get as much range of motion as I can without letting that heel pop up. When I hit that restriction point for a pail, my goal is to push using my calf muscles, pushing down in the ground like I'm pushing off. Holding that position for a count, usually I'll do 5.
So this, you'll try to like kind of push that capsule. You're trying to fix that capsule yourself. Okay. So that's what he's talking about, going into the 5 seconds.
5 to 10 seconds max, coming on back, and then pushing back into that new range of motion that we hopefully gathered. Doing that 2 or 3 times until you hit that end range. You can do it either forward or at different angles, or using a weight, you can also load up that movement a little bit.
Right. These are huge. These could actually change what's happening in there, you know, like really, really do it. You know, you kind of go in that joint space and we can really change a lot of that perspective.
Regressive or a rail exercise, what we're going to do is the opposite. Instead of pushing down, you're actually going to pretend like you're bringing your foot up using the front tibialis muscles, holding that for about 5 seconds, and then pushing forward. If you have any questions on how to do that or need instructions on how to do the rep scheme, set scheme, make sure to let us know.
Okay, so if you saw that one, let me put that one in. That was pretty good. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So now that you've seen a couple of them, these can be really, really important, like as you go. So hopefully, you know, hopefully I have to get on Rumble and I'll make sure that this one gets on there because it's so worth it. But as you go, a lot of times when you're able to, you know, see these types of ones, right? We're not asking the biggest thing is understanding, like getting out and getting evaluated, right? And understanding where your issue is in that hip. And then once that happens, if it's osteoarthritis, that's the journey. That's the challenge, right? And these two, you know, so remember hip CARS, right? CARS, and pails and rails, hip pails and rails will be really, really good. Okay. Okay. So this one's called the 90s stretch. Okay. So this one's a little more advanced. I wanted to show you this one. This one is for people that don't have necessarily a hip issue yet. Sorry. Very possibility that it could happen. But one of the best hip mobility ones, if your hips are an issue. Sorry. So let me share my screen. Man, clicking buttons all over the place. Okay, here we go. So this one's the 90-90 stretch. Okay, this is kind of rough. So do not do this without asking your doctor first, of course. But if you're in pretty good health with your hips and you just feel like they're getting stiff, this is something you could add to your regimen.
Perform the 90-90 hip stretch. So the first thing you need to do is get the right setup. So we want 90-degree angle at the front knee, 90-degree angle at the back knee. We want the shoulders square to the front shin. Now we want our body to be centered over the hips. So if you're tight, you're going to be out here. Now to correct that, you're going to use your hand as leverage to get your body center, or you can post out on a yoga block, like so. From there, what you're going to do.
So basically for my podcast audience, put in 90-90 hip stretch and you'll get it. It's kind of like you're doing crisscross applesauce with one leg in front of you and then frogging the other leg behind you. Hopefully that makes sense.
But get the stretch is you're going to lean your shoulders forward, think shoulders forward and tailbone tilting up.
This one's fantastic for that low back as well. And those SI joints can be huge this direction. So very, very good stretch to do.
Okay, we're trying to tilt the pelvis to get an increased stretch on the underside of this hip. Oftentimes people will do this, and all we're doing is flexing the back, but that's not going to do anything for the hip itself. So shoulders forward, tilt the tailbone up, Make yourself nice and tall.
Very good. Okay, I just wanted to add that one in there because I thought that was fantastic. So just remember, look it up in the 9090. Oh, let me put this guy in there in my comments. Man, of course, the one night the Rumble's not working. Hopefully everybody's having a good time on Facebook and YouTube then, but that'll be good. Okay, so these are, I put in the comments like the different videos we just watched. Very simple. I like the quick ones because then we'll add it to our routine a lot easier. Okay, so now let's talk about a few things. Now we get to go on to I believe the nutritional aspect of the stuff. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're going into the thoughts, toxins, trauma aspect of things, right? So we've done some good movement patterns. I didn't overwhelm you this time. Remember hip cars, hip pails, and rails. Okay, so those are two good ones that can start your hip journey. Remember always to evaluate the whole thing because it'll help you a ton. Now let's go through the nutrition that could be aimed right at the hip joint, and especially osteoarthritis of the hip. So let's see. Okay, so let's talk about the first thing is anti-inflammatory, right? So we want to get our anti-inflammatory foundations, want to have a nice anti-inflammatory diet. Get rid of fake sugars, gluten, gluten, get rid of some of that, especially our fake gluten in our lives. All the alls. So try to eat a very clean, organic diet. That helps a lot in the inflammation. So there's a lot of anti-inflammatory foundations. So you want to make sure, because there's a lot of arthritises, bursitis, and just overuse injuries in the hip itself. So you need to start looking at the pattern of anti-inflammatory eating. So doing fatty fish, wild caught, green leafy vegetables, some berries, and give make the inflammation system of our body work less, not as hard. Okay. So omega-3s have been found. Fatty fish like salmon and sardines can help with the inflammation cascade. I think they have something to do with helping with some joint and cartilage repair. So omega-3s could be up there. Collagen and connective tissue support. A lot of times we're going to start looking at, there's going to be some interesting things coming out. My suggestion is always bone broth is one of the first things. Chondroitin and glucosamine, they're always up there. I don't know if I'm in love with them yet. I'd rather see a nice krill oil or something else. But some people say they do better on chondroitin and glucosamine. I just think there's other stuff out there that could be there. I'm keeping an eye on a couple, the collagen type peptides, which I'm not totally sold on yet, but if I'll keep researching it and see if the innate intelligence of our body would like those. We're going to stick in the anti-inflammation area with curcumin, which is the active ingredient of turmeric, right? It always comes up in almost every episode that we're going to be talking about joints, right? And if you pair it with, and make sure your turmeric or curcumin has piperine in it for the black pepper, because it allows even more absorption of the turmeric or curcumin. And it's one of the best studied natural anti-inflammatories, along with bromelain, ginger, those kind. Boswellia. So boswellia in the herbal world is very studied for joint health. And a lot of times it's very good for even pain management type stuff. And so a lot of times adding boswellia as an herb to your arsenal could be very, very good. So remember boswellia on top of that. Vitamin D and calcium. You need the bone health, right? So you need, what else do you need in vitamin D? I don't have my people on probably a Rumble, but vitamin D, right? D3, K2, magnesium. Those three, vitamin D3, K2, magnesium, allows the calcium to get reabsorbed into the bone where it needs to be. So if you don't have all three, that can mess with you quite a bit. So remember that vitamin D helps the absorption of calcium into the bone. But sometimes if you're low on K2, that could be a problem. Magnesium is another one that helps with a few different things, but it helps with muscle relaxation around the hip complex, the glutes, the hip flexors, the adductors, which matters when tightness is contributing to the pain picture. Okay. So that magnesium can be a good one in over chronic muscle contraction, which can happen very often, but no one really likes to talk about because we have chronic inflammation, right? We can have chronic muscle damage as well that needs to be cleared out of there as well. So hydration and joint lubrication are some other key factors. So this is very simple, but very often missed, probably the most often missed. If your joints are not hydrated, if we're not drinking a lot of water, then they start to dehydrate. Think of what happens if meat gets the water sucked out of it. It becomes beef jerky. How is so if you take a steak, okay, and you cook that steak to perfect, like let's say it's medium rare, and it's just still squishy, delicious, right? What happens to the collagen, the different fascial layers that are on the steak? They're still kind of there, right? So as you're eating the steak, you see that. If you take beef jerky, however, what happens? It gets dried out, right? The ligament, the scar tissue, or the collagen type stuff, the fascia there becomes dried out, and it's really, really tough. We learned that with Jeromy and his beef ribs. Okay, you're taking a layer of fascia off the ribs to make them like what they were tonight, where they were delicious. And the reason is because the layer of fascia tightens them up and makes them like more beef jerky. Okay, so remember, hydration and joint lubrication, big thing. And that's why those the hip cars and the hip pails and rails are really good, because it actually helps hydrate too. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've gotten through. Hopefully you guys are liking those aspects of things. So now what we're going to talk about is Louise Hay's work. So let's say we really want to go to the cause of why this hip, degeneration in hip is happening. Okay. We're not going to, we're going to constantly do the movement patterns that we want. We want to give the innate intelligence of our body every chance we can get. Okay. Every chance. So what are we going to do? We're going to do the movements that we just talked about. Super simple. We're going to start eating anti-inflammatory wise, taking some inflammation, supplements, herbs, all those kind of things. So maybe a little boswellia in there. So now the last part is the subconscious, right? So we got to make sure and Louise Hay's work is one of these that shows you there could be an emotional subconscious program that's led to a certain part of your body. Good example in acupuncture. In your lower back, that kind of represents anger. In Chinese medicine, this is the way it is too. Upper back is kind of frustration, and the neck is overwhelmment. Okay. So those are kind of generalities. But what Louise Hay does is like each individual area, we kind of break it down and we get this cool mantra. So tonight, what I want to do is go through the explanation. Remember, this doesn't have to be you ever, right? We just want to do this, and then have at the very last minute, we can say, here's the explanation, right? And here is the mantra you're going to say. So if you have this hip condition, why not do it? You don't know. It's in your subconscious, right? So this is what Louise Hay says. In her framework, hip problems represents a fear of going forward with major decisions. The hips represent the idea that the next step in your life is important. Pain or discomfort, in her view, is your body's way of telling you to slow down, look around, and get clear before you take that next step. there's also a physical logic underneath the metaphor worth mentioning. Walking itself requires you to thrust the hip forward and trust that your leg will catch you. An act of faith with every single step. Isn't that interesting? When someone's stuck emotionally about their next step in life, it's a fitting metaphor for why the hip may become the pressure point. So I thought that was so interesting when she does this stuff. So how we do it is we don't focus totally on that, right? We don't want to go, oh my God, the next journey, it must be something I'm doing wrong. No. What we want to do is free ourselves of that going, oh, that's a possibility, right? So here is what we do. This is the mantra that we're gonna say for our hips. Okay. I am in perfect balance. I move forward in life with ease and with joy at every age. Isn't that cool one? Love that. I am in perfect balance. I move forward in life with ease and with joy at every age. So remember that, write that down. If you become part of my, it'll be in my transcript, tribe1, trib1.substack.com, where we make a little newsletter that'll have that in there so you don't ever have to forget it. But what I always suggest is take a sticky note, put that up on your mirror in your bathroom or in your car. And that is how we can do all three areas at once, and especially in the hip stuff. So hopefully you guys enjoyed tonight. What are we going to do for our 1% improvement? We're going to try the cars exercises. There's 2 that we recommended highly. Write down that mantra. That's number 2. That could be good. Get into that anti-inflammatory flow. A lot of times you're going to notice, like, if you get into the anti-inflammatory flow, all of a sudden, magically, these exercises that are like kind of improving the capsule of the hip start to improve with it. And don't forget, I'll put it up there. I forgot. Dang it. I should have put it up there. There's a little QR code up here for different supplements. So if you saw something on there, if you want to order some Boswellia or something, this is called Full Script. It's hooked directly to me. So a lot of times I'll see that you're in there. And sometimes even, I think you can send me a message in there. I haven't tested that part yet. I'm trying to get somebody. I might have Rachel do it because she's hooked to me. And so I want to see if it'll send a message to me directly. So yeah, because that would make that thing even sweeter, which is great. There's 35,000 supplements in there directly to your door. Anything happens to them, you can send them right back, all that stuff. You don't have to come in, do anything. It's just beautiful. So, but I hope you guys had a good night. This was really fun. The hips is pretty impressive. And what you can do, just remember it's a deep, very complex joint, even though it doesn't seem like it. And so a lot of times don't give up on the hip. Keep working, keep trying different things. I've seen some amazing recoveries where people that were supposed to get a hip replacement, 6 years later didn't have to. And those are true stories. They're uncommon, but they're true. And so let's make them a little more common, shall we? All right. Well, you guys have a great week and enjoy this time. And if you got anybody with old trucks, let me know because we're looking. All right. With that, see you Wednesday night, 8:30 for Whole Health Weekly. Have a good one.